Good afternoon, everybody. It's David Leese, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier, and a warm welcome to everybody from coast to coast to coast. It's April 17, 2025, and it's hard to believe that the election, you may have heard, the federal election, is just around the corner. And so, well, I have a question. Have you registered? Have you voted in the advanced polls that are coming up, or are you waiting for the big day? So we have lots of important things to talk about, and we've been delighted. Good afternoon, Matthew. We have so many regulars, and it's amazing the hundreds of comments and questions that we get from our audience, and we really do value them. It's interesting the amount of discussions we've had the last several weeks zeroing in on the election. We know that elections have consequences, they involve choices. And so we want to facilitate that kind of policy discussion. We do so in a way that tries to understand, well, where are all the parties coming from? And it's a very interesting dynamic because it's almost like, well, some parties don't necessarily want to share what they're really thinking, or maybe they don't know. We can always debate about that. But there are policy choices involved here. And one of the things we want to zero in on a little bit more today is the topic of the economy. So I'm really excited that we'll be introducing in a moment, after some of the headlines, some extraordinary guests that can talk about, well, the state of our economy. What are some of the important economic issues that matter to Canadians, at least from our opinion, that we should be thinking about during this election? Because policy choices have consequences on our standard of living, really everything that matters to our lives as Canadians. And of course, this is in many respects a extra, if I can use that phrase, extra special important historic election. So we've got a lot to talk about today as we talk about the state of the economy and what's going on and how are things going. So a couple headlines I did want to mention is that, of course, Stats Canada released earlier this week the take on inflation. It's up a little bit at 2.3%. And meanwhile, the Bank of Canada announced today that they're holding the rate at 2.75%. So, given the uncertainty of the world, is that a good decision? We can debate about that. We also continue to hear a lot about rhetoric around elbows up. It's not just Canadians that are booing at some of the hockey games, although it doesn't seem to be as much. And we're getting a lot of comments as well. We've got what is it? Look it up. Just 7 days ago, Carney's, what is it called here? Airline something or a Texas company was being marketed hard with the underlying success being hinged on government regulations. So that is a quote World Economic Forum radio. So it's interesting people's take on understanding where is Mark Carney coming from. So yeah, we have a lot of rhetoric regarding U.S. travel boycotts, and we should buy more Canadian goods. It's interesting. In BC, the provincial government is not budging from its request that British Columbians avoid traveling to the U.S., even as California Governor Gavin Newsom urges Canadian tourists to return to his state. So it's very interesting. I believe the housing minister in the province, Ravi Kolon, is his name, said, "Hold the line." Said the BC's pressure campaign is working with 70% fewer people heading south for the holidays. So interesting. Are you changing your holiday plans, or should we, in fact, pursue a different strategy, and that is to do actually travel to the U.S. more? You tell me. We also know in other news that the Supreme Court is hearing an appeal whether Canadians have a constitutional right to travel. This came up as an issue, as you may know, during COVID-19, so that the court is going to be hearing that. We also had an interesting statement from the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, said he's open to pursuing a second port on Hudson's Bay, probably Port Nelson. I know they've also invested in trying to develop further the Port of Churchill, but the whole idea was that Premier Kinew said he expressed an openness Tuesday to a potential second port on Hudson's Bay as a tool to help ramp up trade with Europe amid trade disputes with the United States. So this theme of trying to diversify trade. What can we do to get this country in order? And it's funny, on a bit of a humorous note, you may have noticed that in the United States, they're trying to deal with getting rid of overregulation, as they call it. And this one was the whole issue of shower heads, of all things. So the White House explained this week it chokes the American economy, entrenches bureaucrats, and stifles personal freedom. From gas stoves and water heater bans to washing machines and dishwashers, they won't get the job done. Furnace mandates, low flow toilets that barely flush, a long list of intrusions that lower the quality of life for Americans, quietly making the government bigger. So, what do you think about regulation? Are those good examples? Who knew that shower heads were such a concern? So, anyways, it's kind of interesting point there. So, we know that policy matters, and we're glad that you're all here today as we think about the election. And again, look forward to your comments and questions. So I'm very delighted to turn to some special guests that are joining me. And we have three of them lined up. Two of them are joining us right now. And the first one is William Watson. And William is, of course, our friend and editor from the Financial Post comment page. And I'm delighted to see you, William Watson.
David, nice to be here.
And William, I know that it was funny, we were talking earlier about the French language debate. We'll get to that in a sec, but it was humorous. You were kind of conflicted between the hockey game and the debate. Is that true last night?
Yes, it kept flipping back and forth. Thanks to the miracle of recording, I didn't have to miss a moment of either. But the more compelling one was the hockey game with Montreal trying to beat Carolina, which they did to qualify for the playoffs for the first time.
All right, so congratulations. I take it. Are you a Habs fan? I take it.
Yeah, okay. I was born and raised in Montreal, still live in Montreal, and it's been a long time since the team has been successful, but it seems to have a bright future with a couple of 19 and 20 and 21-year-old players.
Well, that's great. Well, hopefully they can catch up with other teams, including the Winnipeg Jets, who I think already have a playoff spot. So it's pretty exciting time for Canadian hockey.
We're going to have our elbows up against Washington because we're playing Washington in the first round of the playoffs. So that'll take us to the heart of the action in North America.
That's great. Excellent. Well, in the meantime, I also want to extend a warm welcome back to, of course, our Vice President of Policy and Research, Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini. Great to see you, Marco.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
And in keeping with the hockey theme, how are the Flames doing? I haven't quite followed that as closely. Do they have a possibility?
No. I'm a former Montrealer, so I keep tabs on the Habs, but not on the Flames.
Yeah, the Flames just
flamed out,
squeezed out at the last bit. They like Montreal, were fighting for the playoffs, and I guess we're like Columbus now, the last team in the West not to make it.
All right. Well, that's cute. I honestly didn't plan this discussion about hockey, but it is very entertaining and timely given the playoff season is emerging here. Hey, I want to appreciate a comment from our audience from Foam Fatel tuning in from Ottawa. Thank you again for your work, David and team, and having such engaging guests and discourse. Really interested in how tonight's debate will unfurl. Exactly. So thank you very much for that kind compliment. And that's right. We've had some debates. We had the French one last night, and then tonight, Thursday, is going to be the English debate. And I hope everybody is tuning in. So what I wanted to do is play a few highlights from the leaders as we talk about what's going on with the election, and then we can dive in. There's lots to talk about. One of which is the NDP. We're still waiting, I believe, for a full election platform. We've seen different policy announcements, including the emphasis on victory bonds and the concerns about tax evasion. And it's interesting. I think the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, has said, don't count the NDP out. And I think there's a clip here, Madam Producer, if memory serves me correctly here. But we have a situation where he's also emphasized we shouldn't trust the polls. So Jagmeet Singh is there. I think part of the story here has been where the NDP traditionally has been in the teens in terms of support, and that's diminished quite a bit. So we need to keep our eyes on the NDP. We also have an announcement regarding crime again and the use of the notwithstanding clause, and this is by opposition leader Pierre Poilievre.
We cannot go on with another 4 years of liberal catch and release. We need a change to bring safety back to our streets. That's why I am announcing today that a future Conservative government will bring that change. Not only will we repeal liberal catch and release laws, we will carry out the biggest crackdown on crime in Canadian history. And we will do it by passing the 3 strikes you're out law. 3 strikes you're out means that anyone convicted of 3 serious offenses will be ineligible thereafter for bail, probation, parole, or house arrest. And they will serve a minimum of 10 years behind bars, a maximum of life imprisonment, and they will have to earn their release even still.
Now, I know that Mark Carney, the Liberal leader, did respond expressing some concern about the use of the notwithstanding clause as, quote, very dangerous step. Quote, politicizing certain issues with respect to fundamental rights is a slippery slope that leads to a further politicization. So that's a very interesting debate there. The leaders' debates did happen last night, as I mentioned, in terms of French language. One of the things, there's a picture there of the leaders there, and we'll dive into that in a sec. I did want to share some of the polls. It seems to be a two-way race with the Liberals with a bit of an edge. It's interesting if we bring up some of the polls information. It's a little bit confusing here. This is one from Main Street that actually shows the Conservatives at 43, the Liberals at 40, and I think the NDP are at 5. It's kind of hard to believe. And then there's other polls that seem to indicate the Liberals with a more substantive lead. Here's one neck and neck. I believe that's from Abacus at the Liberals, both tied with the Conservatives at 39. The NDP at 11, the Bloc at a bit of a lower rate there. But what we have is clearly it's kind of a two-way race here, at least it seems to be. Do those polls surprise you, William, as you look at them?
I guess not. There's real importance. It's an important election, and who's prime minister is maybe even more important than normally. And in a two-way split like that, the smaller parties get squeezed out. It's happened a number of times before, and I guess that doesn't surprise me. The problem I have with it is that the election is supposed to be about who can stand up most effectively to Trump. There are two people who can stand up effectively to Trump. One is Putin, and one is Melania. And you can't tell whether Trump's going to like somebody or not like somebody. And are they going to get along? Seems to get along with the Prime Minister of Italy. Seems to get along with the Prime Minister of the UK. The UK's great advantage, J.D. Vance says, is that they don't have a trade surplus with the United States. So, you're dealing in an environment where information is not as valuable as you would normally think it is. So I think Canadians are wasting our time if we are trying to figure out, well, this person is going to get along well with Trump and stand up well, and this person is not. So I think the election should be about, I'm an economist, I taught policy. I think the election should be about policy. And to a certain extent, we're coming around to that, but there's not a lot of time left.
Yeah, that's a very good point. There's not a lot of time left, but I agree with you, William, that surely elections should be about policy. And so turning to you, Marco, what's your comment? Should we draft, as per William's suggestion, Melania Trump? Maybe she should join Team Canada.
She seemed to like Justin, so maybe not. Look, it is an unfortunate aspect of our politics that there is so much emphasis on personalities and on the leaders, not on ideas and not on policy. I don't disagree with Bill at all. I think there's been a slight improvement in relation to maybe the previous 2 or 3 elections, that we are at least talking about whether the leader that we want to embrace is going to stand up to someone, as opposed to putting all emphasis on hair and the color of one's socks. So at least when we have to talk about Trump, we have to infuse a little bit more than just looks and personality. I was struck by how this whole thing is playing out in relationship to Trump, of course, but I was also kind of surprised at watching the debates last night that Trump came up in the conversation several times, but it did not figure as prominently and as rapidly, I will say, in the same way that we saw at the beginning of the election. So I think there is a slight progress there.
Interesting. So Trump may be receding. It sounds like that's a dynamic that's changing. Do you have a similar read on that as well, William?
Yeah, the debate last night started off in what I thought was a very strange way. The moderator said that Trump's the big issue of the campaign, and the Trump tariffs are very important. Give me two policies that you're going to pursue that have nothing to do with that. Okay, that's killing your lead, I guess.
Yeah, that's funny.
That question, I understood the French. I didn't understand the logic of it, but there was a wide range of subjects that were discussed, and that's I think that's good. I was depressed and dismayed that there was unanimity about supply management. And of course, Mark Carney asked on the famous TV program Tout le monde en parle, what do you like about Quebec? The first thing he said was supply management. Pierre Poilievre is not going after supply management. He claims to support our farmers and farm policy, including supply management. I don't think Donald Trump knows a lot about supply management, but he knows that U.S. dairy products have a tough time getting into Canada. And that's definitely going to be on his side of the table.
Yeah.
If it's not on our side of the table, I don't know how we're going to arrive at any kind of deal with Trump. So it would be very useful and I think honest for our politicians to say, look, something's going to happen with these. Eventually we're going to have to release the 40 million Canadian citizens from the control of the 9,000 dairy farmers and sort of liberate the large number of people who would like to have easier and cheaper access to cheese and ice cream and milk and yogurt and so on. And in this respect, Donald Trump is kind of helping us along. Now, I'm a never Trumper, but I just think they're evading what's likely to be an important part of any discussion. And one of them is going to have to essentially betray the dairy industry in political terms and betray Quebec. But of course, they're going to do that after the election. People who voted for them because they were opposed to supply management are going to feel very betrayed. And, another strike against our political system will result. It'd be much better if we could have a candid discussion about how this industry works and how it really has to change, as it has changed in Australia and New Zealand, to name two important dairy producers that went through this and managed to finesse the politics, get the politics done right.
So you're actually looking at the debate, William, and you're daring to challenge us to think, well, maybe they're not being as candid on a lot of very important issues, one of which is supply management, which has obviously been a real irritant for our main trading partner, the United States, among others. And what are the other issues that are not being talked about? One is probably the rebuilding of the military. And I know that's an irritant too, that we're not carrying our weight as a NATO partner. What do you think, Marco?
Well, it is a kind of a bad thing. In fact, probably a terrible thing that supply management is now paired as kind of an aspect of Canadian identity that we don't want to let go. I thought it was kind of interesting that the one who parsed the debate a little bit better about supply management was Blanchet. And he said something that perhaps the other ones, including Carney and Pierre, didn't want to hear, is that the Canadian negotiators have been giving up space to dairy products in previous negotiations. This certainly was the case in the last negotiation of the trade treaty, and he brought it up as a kind of alarm that it was coming, that there would be more lopped off the area of dairies in the common negotiations, as Bill alluded. To the second part of your question about defense, it was Blanchet also who brought up the beefing up of the Canadian forces. I was puzzled about that because I'm old enough to remember the Bloc Québécois being a kind of a bunch of peaceniks, really. I mean, they were pacifists for a good deal of time, especially when Duceppe was in office. So to have the Bloc Québécois raise the idea that Canada needed to spend more and beef up its forces seemed, a good development, but kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, very interesting comments as well from the audience here.
Yeah, I think he was also using that as a way of saying that the two major parties who are trying to offer at least some degree of income tax cuts just aren't going to be able to do that because there are military obligations that we're going to have to undertake, and a number of other social policies that people either want to maintain or expand. Some of the parties do. And I think Blanchet's view was if that's the case, then you can't afford any kind of tax cuts, and maybe you're even going to have to increase them. It's not impossible, of course, that our expanded military presence will involve increasing the number of military bases in rural Quebec. And so there's a political rationale to that point of view. But
beefing up the 22nd.
The advantage of a guy who has zero chance of being prime minister and will always be in the opposition is that he could sound very plausible by saying things that other people can't say. So.
Yeah, I had the same sort of reaction. I thought he might have in mind the beefing up of the 22nd Regiment and the reopening of the Saint-Jean school.
That's right.
Very interesting. So I do want to look at the bigger picture of Canada, and I'm going to turn to both of you and ask the significance of this election. I want to start off with a little bit of a graph here that looks at the last 10 years. It's been floating around quite a bit. In fact, it was used in a newspaper ad. I think it was near the Financial Post from a number of business leaders who said, look, we need to look at the growth based on GDP, gross domestic product per capita, in the last 10 years. And there on that graph on the very top is, of course, a little dot where it shows Canada grew at some 0.5%. I think this is from the International Monetary Fund, if memory serves me correctly. And then you've got a whole host of countries from Germany to the Netherlands at 14.3%, Denmark at 18.9%, and of course the United States at 20.7%. So I want to ask both of you, what does this mean then in terms of, this is in my mind a terrible reflection that Canada's been in a very low growth economy, to put it politely. So what does this mean in terms of the kind of policy decisions that we need to make to get Canada back on track? Bill, do you want to take that on?
I don't, the great disadvantage of politics is people are asking for new ways of thinking and new ideas and so on. I don't have any new ideas. I got old ideas, but I think they're good ideas. And that is that you create the right incentives for people to work very hard, be very imaginative, make as much money as they can, employ as many people as they can. And I just think that you leave that to individuals, individual companies and individual people. And the contrasting idea is you get somebody like Mark Carney who says, well, I understand how the economy works. And he takes our money and He doesn't spend it directly, so I guess that's good. But he sets up a big investment pool. You know, his training is as a banker, and so I guess if you're a banker, every problem that you know looks like it needs an investment pool, and so his mechanism for getting growth is to set up such a large investment pool. Now, the difficulty is that his party, which has been in power for 10 years, did that about 4 times during the past 10 years. And in some of those instances, the investment pool was put together and couldn't get the money out the door. As somebody who was very skeptical of their ability to choose winning investments, I guess I was kind of pleased that they didn't get money out the door. But I don't think this is the right strategy. I think the strategy is you have to lower taxes, you have to cut regulation and red tape. I mean, red tape is sort of the regulatory version of waste, right? But waste is in the eye of the beholder. It may be that there are some regulations that are useful, but you know the benefit that they bring is far outweighed by their cost in slowing things down and employing lawyers and consultants and people who write reports rather than people who build things. So these are sort of time-honored quotes right-wing, quotes Republican ways of doing things, but I think they're time-tested. And I really can't understand how, unless we do encourage people by letting them keep more of the money that they earn, letting them keep more of the profits that they earn, letting them keep more of the rate of return on any of their investments, I don't see how you get growth. And so it's a simple-minded approach. Keep taxes low, put them on broad bases, and then retire and go and do something else. There must be something that politicians can do that's not harmful or interfering or wasteful. And so I really think that's what we have to do. And the problem, one of the problems in the last 10 years is we've moved in the opposite direction.
Yeah, right. So we haven't done the basics, and so those results are not really surprising, are they, Bill?
No, I think you know we've put a great emphasis on climate. We put a great emphasis on net zero, on regulating things out of business, on stopping pipeline growth, and so on. And I think it's not surprising that we're reaping the harvest of what we really haven't planted. Now, by the same token, I don't want to go pipeline crazy or infrastructure crazy. I would like to see people build pipelines if they think they can make money selling the stuff that they're going to move through the pipelines. But right now we've got people, you know, let's have a second port in Hudson Bay. Is it clear that the first port actually makes economic sense? I don't think we should, you know, Leacock's horseman who rode off in all directions at once. I think we got to avoid that. Those who want to make a living off of public funds must be relishing the prospect of a big new infrastructure program or a big new pipeline program. I'd still like to see some cost benefit discipline. Leave a lot of things to the market, and if people using their own money decide that it's worthwhile investing, then great. But if they only invest using other people's money, I don't think we're going to get good results.
Exactly. It's funny, from the audience, Christina Rose says, true, socialists always run out of everyone else's money. I think that's a good paraphrase from the late Margaret Thatcher. So, Marco, any comment about that graph? What does that mean? Is that actually a fair graph in terms of what's happened to Canada the last 10 years?
Well, then people say numbers speak for themselves. Of course, that is only partly true. I see that graph as a kind of indictment on the policies of the last 10 years. Let me pick up on Bill's point about cost benefit, because there used to be a time, for example, in which governments, not just the federal government, but governments across the board, evaluated projects on the basis of cost benefit. That wasn't the only way in which they got evaluated, but one of them. And this government, essentially about 10 years ago, made the announcement that they were going to evaluate every single program going through the government on the basis of intersectionality, whether it was foreign policy or domestic policy or what have you.
What is intersectionality, Marco? Are you
Intersectionality
killing us off or what?
is kind of the woke idea that all these woke things need to be infused into the regular processes of government. So radical environmentalism, radical DEI, or an emphasis on identity politics and transsexuality, and all these things that needed to be checked and infused in government policy. Look, even if one accepts that some of these things may be desirable or even important, to sort of shuck everything else, including the markers for economic progress, is foolish. But it isn't just a little bit foolish. The graph shows that the United States has grown its economy 41 times more than Canada, right? So that is just is just beyond the pale if you really think about it, right? Because we are a smaller country, but this has got nothing to do with size. This has got to do with the proportionality of the ill effects of public policy. I'd like to point out by way of segue, that one of the most shocking, to me anyway, parts of the debate last night was when the Radio-Canada moderator chastised all the participants for essentially not presenting a fiscal plan and costing numbers for their policies. He called them irresponsible. When was the last time that somebody from Mother Corps called a politician irresponsible? And there are other things, by the way, which the politicians aren't doing and are not part of the debate. We can talk about those, but that to me was kind of one of the defining moments of the show last night, when none of them, and Mr. Carney, of course, got taken to task because he was told that he's a guy who likes to say that he likes numbers, but he still didn't have numbers, and his best response was, well, the other guys aren't doing it too, which is also a very low grade, a very low bar for a government.
I think that's a very good point, Marco. Surely one of the foundational policy principles of good public policy is transparency, accountability, performance, and so one of that involves, of course, being clear on your program, your policy program, and the costs. Would you agree with that, Bill?
Yeah, sure. And with the proviso that sometimes it is hard to estimate exactly what the numbers are, even if people have the best will to do so, and sometimes it's good to farm that out to, if you want to increase your credibility, farm it out to independent experts who will endorse your numbers. But yeah, I think you want to. We as voters should insist that people issue a list of intentions and try to tell us something about what they're going to cost. Now, the obvious difficulty is, if you say we're going to find how we're going to pay for this, if we're going to find waste and seek efficiencies in government, and we think we can find $10 billion, the next question is, well, exactly where? And
exactly
when you're running, you don't want to say exactly where, because it's a good way to make instant enemies and to motivate people to mobilize against you. But I think we should have, and the other difficulty, of course, is you get into office and it's not a question of reading the books and finding out that they're terrible, but things do happen. And so you may not be able to carry through on a promise, and other things may come up that become more necessary expenditures or cuts than you were thinking of. So we have to, that's to be a grain of salt with all this stuff. But yeah, they're running to try to run the government. They should give us a relatively precise idea of what they'd like to do once they get their hands on it.
Right on. It is, after all, our money and our future. So I am so delighted to be having this conversation, of course, with William Watson, editor with the Financial Post comment page, Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini, vice president at Frontier, and of course, who just joined us is the president of the Coalition of Concerned Businesses and Manufacturers, and that's of course the great Catherine Swift. So a warm welcome to you, Catherine.
Thank you. Happy to join you all.
Well, Catherine, we've been debriefing about a lot of things with the audience, including on the last French language debate. The English one is coming up tonight. And we just showed, of course, some of Canada's financial records over the last 10 years. Is this election a seminal election in your mind? I mean, you're relating to all kinds of members who are on the front line, so to speak, trying to create a economic future, and they're creating jobs, their businesses. What's the mood there? And is this an important election in their mind?
Yeah, it's a very important election. I mean, every election, there's somebody that says this is the most important election of our lifetime. I think it's just one of those things. But this one does actually seem to be one of the most important elections. We know what the record of the last 10 years is. You put up that IMF chart of GDP per capita growth, and ours has been abysmal. And part of that is because of our immigration policy. We brought so many people irresponsibly into the country that and that's in a way to boost GDP, because you bring people in, they're going to have to buy stuff. They're going to have to, spend money. So that does give a bump to GDP, but it's not proportional to what they're contributing to the economy. So it's been a bit of a phony, we've sort of had this phony GDP numbers in a way that is more dependent on immigration than actual productive behavior among our businesses and so on. So, and of course, the end result is that very small GDP per capita number, because the per capita part has increased and the numerator has not. So we've sort of been sold a bill of goods in some ways. We would have been, there's some analysts that have shown we would have been in recession if we hadn't had the immigration sort of buoy up our GDP. And the government, of course, has liked to boast about not being in recession. But we clearly have cumulative economic problems that are policy related. And yes, there are some problems always that affect us from outside of the country we can't do anything about. However, we have not handled the things that we could do something about very well. And I just coming in on some of the last conversation here, I certainly agree that we have a tax system that's right out of control. We have gotten our regulatory structure to the point that we can't build anything, and investment dollars have flown out of the country because of that. Because when you want to start some kind of resource project and you figure there's a 20-year timeline between when you can get all those permits and actually begin to do whatever the project is you want to do, obviously you take your money elsewhere. And this is what's happened. And this all degrades Canada, because we're so dependent on, we're a relatively small economy in the world's, sort of the world context. And so we're dependent on international investment. What disturbed me about looking at some recent data was so much Canadian investment has fled Canada. Our own folks, our own business people that are here do not want to invest in Canada because they just don't have confidence, and you can't blame them. When you start a project and you have such a long regulatory mess to get through, and often it doesn't even succeed. Even if you do decide to invest your money and spend, a whole pile of time and so on, it ends up being rejected. And that's happened with a number of pipelines.
Okay. So I just want to clarify that, because I don't want to bury that headline. You're saying that the last several years we've just seen money flow out of the country instead of money flowing into the country to create investment, businesses, and opportunity. We've seen the money leave the country. Is that true?
Even from our own Canadian sources. I mean, foreign investors, let's face it, they got a lot of choice. They can look around the world and where's the best return for my investment. But you'd think Canadian investors might have a little bias thinking, oh, if I can do something here at home, I'd kind of like to. But even that money is fleeing Canada. So I think that's a pretty big statement that we've had some horrible policies in this government. And I sadly, should the Liberals be reelected, I don't see much change from that. Mark Carney has been very careful with his wording. He's talked about we're going to be an energy superpower, and yet he's cool on pipelines. How do you do that? Are you going to build a bazillion wind turbines? Is that how you're going to do it? Are you going to spend even more taxpayer dollars on these EV battery plants that don't seem to be doing too well financially? I don't think Carney is being straight with Canadians about his true plans, and given his past, UN and various other climate, all of his international climate alliances, the GFANs and so on. I think he should come clean with Canadians about what his plans are, because he's been very coy, very, very coy when we talk about pipelines. He goes, well, they might not be a priority. And yet most Canadians show they very much realize if we're going to have the economic independence we want, and we should have, and that will bear the best, results for Canadians, we definitely need pipelines to get our resources out to more markets.
Okay. Any comment there, Marco? Are we not being clear about what the Liberal policy vision is on being a, quote, energy superpower if we don't address, elephants in the room like Bill C-69, the so-called Never Pipeline Bill?
Well, I live in the energy capital of the country, and these are sort of clever ways of phrasing certain things that in and of themselves the words are kind of empty, and so they are sort of left to the listener to fill it up. So lots of people around me here thought that when he talked about energy that he meant hydrocarbon energy, and people were excited, and then were shocked when there was a kind of a turn, an about face on pipelines, and basically this desire that he wants to grant veto to just about anyone on pipelines to build pipelines is kind of contradictory. Just one more addition to what Catherine was saying about the GDP issue and the bringing of all these people to kind of sort of provide a little bit of a boost. What it also did, of course, is diluted the productivity of the country, because lots of these people who arrived are not quite, the high earners, and don't have a great productivity ratios. And so we also washed out the economy on the question of productivity, which is terrible in this country.
Your comment, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, we're at a stage here that's, the future is always hard to predict, but that seems to be especially a problem right now with the U.S. Carney has a couple of things going on. He's heads a party that has been an environmentalist party, and he's trying to keep an even more environmentalist party, the NDP, down below double digits in popularity. So he has to still talk about climate and environment and be accommodating to people who still think that those are quite crucial issues. And I think he believes in his heart of hearts, judging by his past writing and speeches and activism and employment. I think he believes in all of that stuff. On the other hand, he's seeking to be prime minister of a country that has this great natural resource endowment and is facing a hostile former best customer. I think, it will still be our best customer, and that Trump too will pass. I hope sooner rather than later. Not in the mortal sense, but the Trump phenomenon and the Trump tariffs will be moved out of the way so that we don't have to go into this rabid diversification that seems to have seized everybody. But if
Mhm.
you know, even if an environmentalist through and through is put into that office and is faced with the inability to sell product in the United States, he's probably going to want to. And part of his selling point is, I went and talked to the Prime Minister of Britain, and I went and talked to the President of France, and we're going to develop new ties. So there's going to be pressure for him to go ahead and create mechanisms for selling Canadian product. So even if he were simply a political cipher without any political preferences, I think he would be pushed by forces in that direction. So I don't think it's going to be as bad as the last 10 years have been. But he also does talk about a carbon border adjustment tax, basically a carbon tariff, and considering all the crazy things that could be done in the carbon cause, makes me nostalgic for the carbon tax.
No, exactly.
As an economist, I was always a supporter of that, and if we could have that and nothing else on the carbon file, I think that would be a pretty good deal. But
indeed,
that's gone.
But more than ever, we need clear answers on what do we mean by being an energy superpower, and does that involve?
I think he always said, has he not said we need to be an energy and clean energy superpower?
He clarified and
he's always
included that, yeah.
Used that phrase, not just energy and clean energy supervisor. But as people have pointed out, we don't have any natural advantage in solar power. We have obviously terrific amounts of hydro. Maybe at the margin, we don't have too much hydro left, but and wind power, we don't have any technological advantage in that. We can use wind turbines, we can buy them from people, but there's no reason to suppose that we would be the world's best in producing them.
Exactly.
And the we is kind of localized, right? I live in a semi-desertic area.
Yeah.
There's no great hydro potential, for example, in southern Alberta. So it's in different pockets of the country, and only at certain times as well, right? And so it's a lot more difficult to put an emphasis on all electricity in that way.
We have lots of uranium. We could be a nuclear superpower, but
indeed,
that doesn't seem to really mesh with the viewpoints of people in that party.
Exactly.
That seemed to have come up yesterday as well. And I'm sorry, Catherine, I'm going to give you a chance in a second. One of the things that it also struck me listening to Bill about all this emphasis on green stuff is the fact that the Green Party got shut out of the debate yesterday. I'm no lover of the people who run the Green Party, but I am a pluralist at heart, and I think that there needs to be space for all kinds of political ideas in the spectrum, and the rationale for shutting them out, that they did not have candidates in 90% of the ridings, seemed kind of phony to me, considering that the Bloc Québécois guy is standing there and of course is not a national party in the true technical sense of the term. So it's again shenanigans trying to keep competitors out. If Mark Carney was as green as he thinks he is, he should be advocating, and so would Singh, and so would Blanchet, that the Green Party deserves to have a position on the stage.
Well, very good point, Marco. And it's interesting. We had an elections commission that was set up a few years ago. I believe its budget is $10 million. So they made that determination to kick the Green Party out. And I believe their main mandate is to hold 2 events. I would volunteer with you, Bill, and Marco and Catherine. We'll hold the debates, and I bet you we could do it for less money. Just a thought.
Well, I think it is sadly Canadian that you set up this commission, you fund it. It seems to me quite generously for something that works only every 2 or 3 years. And then it's devised these rules that rather transparently are designed to keep the Bloc in and to keep the People's Party out. And it's now sort of accidental that because of the low vote by the low popularity ratings, and also the inability or unwillingness to run candidates in 90% of the ridings, that the Greens now basically disqualified themselves. But I think it was sort of natural justice says it was unfair to tell them the morning of the debate that they're no longer in. It should be possible to do that with a little more notice. By the same token, I think 5-person debates are useless, more or less literally useless. And as long as I'm on that subject, I'll just burden you with one more thought. I think the moderator should be given about 100-word limit per the debate, and should be there essentially just to moderate, which means telling people you can't both speak at the same time. And that's it.
Very good.
But
That's great.
Basically last night was the moderator acting somehow as the prosecutor for the people of Canada, telling these people that their answers weren't satisfactory. That's not for him to judge. That's for the people of Canada to judge. There was also typical CBC production, far too much production. Just put the 4 people there. I'd prefer the 2 people. And let them talk. That's what they do in France. They sit them at a table, the 2 candidates in the final round. The moderator is just there to, I guess, keep them from throwing punches. And they just talk. They talk back and forth. They have a conversation that's much more civilized and much more informative.
It's because they're obviously underfunded, Bill. Catherine, what is your comment?
Well, I think the debates that were much better when the networks ran them years ago, before this government commission was created by the Trudeau government to control, obviously, let's face it, to control the debates more. I thought they were much, much better. There were more of them. Some of them were between different, like some of them not everyone participated in. So maybe you'd actually hear more from certain parties than from others and so on. But so what? It was good. We'd often see 5 or 6 debates. So in this notion of having one in English and one in French, I don't agree with. And having it government controlled, I don't either. But what I wanted to say earlier with respect to, Carney's coyness on saying what he wants to do on this hugely important question of, do we unleash our resources, the single biggest contributor in terms of sectors to our GDP, to our economy, or do we not? And something Carney has also talked about is the so-called electrification. Everything's electric. And of course, I'm sure in his ideal world, all that electricity would be generated not by fossil fuels, but by other sources of energy. So wind, solar, and as Bill said, nukes don't seem to come into the equation a lot, even though some provinces, Ontario, is putting some pretty big bets on nukes these days. And I see that as a positive personally. Granted, you need a lot of lead time to build a new nuclear facility and whatnot, so you can't snap your fingers and have a nuke plant operating. But nevertheless, for your baseload power, it's a really efficient way to accomplish it. But this whole electrification thing, and when you look at the costs that are estimated, they're through the roof. And whenever you see a dependence on, I don't even like to call them renewable energy sources, because they're really not that renewable. We have a lot of problems once the life of a wind turbine is over. There's a lot of problems with that from an environmental standpoint. Same with the solar array. These things aren't all green and clean, and EVs. We've seen with electric vehicles also. There's all kinds of problems with them from an environmental standpoint. So, maybe we'll call them alternate energy sources, but we also know they're hugely expensive. They impose way higher costs on your average consumer, on your business. And therefore drive up inflation. They're also unreliable. We saw that situation in Alberta about a year and a bit ago, where they had invested a lot in turbines that were not working. The wind was not blowing. And suddenly they were in trouble of having brownouts and blackouts in the middle of minus 40 odd degree weather. So again, let's smarten up. And perhaps we'll get some wonderful technological innovation in the next few years. We'll change all this. That will permit us to use these sources effectively and reliably and cost effectively. But we don't have that right now. So let's not pretend. Let's not pretend we can do all this with stuff like wind turbines and solar and so on, when we simply can't without major, major negative downsides.
Okay. I do want to share, these are all great comments, a little bit of a glimmer of hope when we talk about doing the basics well in this country, getting us back on track to a better economy and prosperity. And that has to do with the glimmer of hope we saw this week regarding free trade when we said this announcement from the province of Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia.
Today, we're taking a historic step forward to protect and unify our country, to build up Canada's economy by tearing down internal trade barriers. The cost of these barriers to our economy is absolutely enormous. Across the country, internal trade barriers increase the cost of everyday goods and services by nearly 15%. They reduce our national GDP by more than 7% and cost our economy up to $200 billion every single year. In other words, much like President Trump's tariffs, these trade barriers hurt our economy, drive away jobs and investment, and divide us from each other.
So bravo on those three provinces for coming together. I must confess I haven't done a more in-depth analysis about the announcement, but it seems to be a step in the right direction where we're in a country where we don't have free trade across Canada. So those stats, if they're believed by Premier Doug Ford was referring to, are very significant. That means thousands of dollars potentially for every Canadian. So why haven't we done this yesterday in this country as having free trade? Bill, do you want to go first?
I don't think it's complicated. You get concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. Industry groups or union groups get together and they ask for favors from government. Government doesn't really hear opposition from the people who are going to be affected, because often the cost to each person affected is $40, $50, even less than that. And it's not worth petitioning your local MNA or MLA about it. So, I mean, it's a standard problem of politics. And ask that question to Doug Ford. If this is such a good idea, why didn't you do it a long time ago? Well, because every time somebody came and asked for a favor and they're a good Ontarian, he figured, what the hell? It costs people in New Brunswick. It costs people in Nova Scotia. They don't vote in my elections. And so and it's local. You know, people love the local economy. I want to do something for my neighbor. And, so this is like mother's milk in politics. So I will be shocked. This is at least the third agreement that has been signed. We had one in the 90s that was a across Canada free trade agreement.
Yes,
we had one again in 2016 or so. That was and it applied WTO rules. It was very elaborate, and there were some useful cases where people were taken before tribunals and things had to be opened up. But we had the Supreme Court of Canada saying it's okay to keep Quebec beer out of New Brunswick if New Brunswick wants to. So I've read the estimates and where they come from. It's a very hard thing to estimate. Sure. So I wouldn't be surprised if the estimates are exaggerated. I will be shocked and really pleasantly surprised if, in fact, we do get rid of a lot of this stuff. And encourage, reciprocity has a bad name because of Trump, because he's doing reciprocal tariffs. There's nothing essentially wrong with the idea of reciprocity. If if you honor our regulations, we'll honor your regulations. It makes a lot of sense to me. That would be pretty easy to implement.
What? You mean you agree with Donald Trump?
Something like that was done in Western Canada, but I don't know if it can be done for the entire country. I sure hope it can be. That'll help in a bad economic environment. I don't think it's a panacea. We're too small an economy for really big economies of scale. But anyway.
Wow, I like how you're thinking, Bill, in the sense that maybe we ought to grow up as a nation and demand more of our political leadership class. I mean, honestly, this is a joke. The whole founding vision of this country with Sir John A. and the whole rest of them was all about free trade in this part of the colony called the, what was it again? The British North America Act, forming the Dominion of Canada, was to have free trade across the colonies. That's why we came together, and that has not been realized. It's kind of pathetic, is it not, Marco?
Yeah, I want to pick up on Bill's comment about the Premier of Ontario, because I lived 6 years in Halifax fairly recently, when Premier Houston, now Premier Houston, was the finance critic. And I could tell you that there is a very large number of times in which I whispered many of these ideas onto Tim's ear. Not that I'm claiming credit for it. This is to your point that at the time, it just didn't seem like a good idea at all to him. And then all of a sudden, there's been some kind of epiphany, I suspect, that the floundering Nova Scotia economy has a great deal to do with it, plus sort of the Trump trade. I was kind of surprised, again, bringing back to yesterday's debate, that none of this came up during the debate yesterday, even though it made it into sort of the national scene at the beginning of the election, like a torrent. Everyone was talking about, getting rid of internal tariffs, internal barriers, and so forth. And there was not even a mention of it. In fact, the support for the dairy rules and marketing boards is in fact a pushback against this idea that there should be open internal borders. And so we have come right back around essentially on the issue of interprovincial trade barriers.
What about you, Catherine? Are you optimistic that we'll someday, over the rainbow, get free trade in this country?
Well, you know that old definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. Well, I've been around a long time at Canadian public policy, and I can remember in my younger days working on this issue and having hope. Oh, they seem to be keen on it this time. And sure enough, it never actually happens. So I would love to see it happen. I think the premiers would be dragged kicking and screaming to, now we've got this threat from the US. When that dies down, back to usual procedures is what I suspect. And like Bill, I wish we could do it. There was a number of years ago, the Western provinces created a little unit where they said they were going to trade with each other on a more reasonable. So there has been progress made, but the notion of us having an actual free trade area in Canada has not occurred as yet. And I'd love to believe it would happen, but the pragmatic part of me thinks that this is probably yet another, threat. We got another threat, so there's some action to be seen. And I like what Tim Houston has done. Is this reciprocity idea is a good one. But I'm from Missouri, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I think the only way we would get it is actually to become the 51st state, because then we would have the interstate commerce clause of the U.S. Constitution that says you can't do this kind of stuff, which our similar clause in the British North America Act says something quite like that, but the courts have not interpreted it in the same way as the U.S. Supreme Court has.
Yeah,
And
that's
so we
right.
get
As
all
for
these-
the,
Now, you've also got to remember that part of this is because Canadians don't actually like each other very much. And why we got supply management in the 1970s was that there was, I can never remember, it was Manitoba chickens broilers were not being accepted in Quebec, and Manitoba eggs were not being accepted in British Columbia. And there were actual cases where the RCMP arrested people who were bringing in illegal eggs into British Columbia, because we got this sort of local is good insanity. And the local producers, they go and ask for protection from the local government, and the local government has a political incentive to give it. So It's not an easy problem, I think, to get rid of a lot of this stuff. The construction unions in Ontario and Quebec, when they were allowed to poach, it's called poaching, jobs from each other, it would get violent. And so we developed very strict rules that said Ontario workers work in Ontario and Quebec workers work in Quebec, and you can't have them go across the border between Ontario and Quebec. So I don't want to minimize the political difficulty of doing this stuff, but thank God for Trump. He at least for a month frightened everybody into admitting that this stuff is stupid, and we really should get rid of it. But I doubt if the political momentum for that is going to sustain itself.
Yeah,
Well,
it seemed to have died
yeah.
down already. And the New West Partnership was really a good model for the country.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it didn't get further than the Ontario-Manitoba border.
And all the stuff about to be able to cut hair in Saskatchewan, you've got to have a certain number of hundreds of hours of practice, and they won't accept anybody from anywhere else to do it. And the Saskatchewan certificate's not good in other provinces. And I mean,
Wow.
it's
So
just money.
but this is the reality here, is that we've got to sift through as citizens the difference between these head fakes and rhetoric, the nonsense that politicians think that we're going to drink this Kool-Aid as Canada continues to decline. Like, you've got this 10-year graph, as we keep citing. I mean, every Canadian politician should be hanging their head in shame at the decline of this country. And frankly, every citizen should be looking at saying, what are we going to do to change course of this good ship so we can get our act together and get on with the program? I mean, this is just totally unacceptable if you really believe that not just we count as Canadians, but the next generation. So anyways, I know that I'm pontificating here, but it's the point is that we've got to do a lot better as a nation. So I've got a lot of comments here coming in from the audience here. One is from Old Town that Madam Producer is a little bit higher up there. That's very interesting. We need energy independence. The path to continental energy dominance is to increase non-tariff American trade. All pipelines going east, west, or south received in Canada should be approved. So, I mean, this is a very important challenge. That can we work with the United States? And it's interesting. I have a clip here from a gentleman by the name of Mark Carney, where he talks about the U.S. relationship being over. And I want to share that with you.
We will need to ensure that Canada can succeed in a drastically different world. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
So that, to me, was a kind of a stunning statement to make, given the realities of our trade relationship with the United States. So, Catherine, I want to begin with you. How should we take that kind of statement? Because, I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a prime minister weigh in so, well, in such a dramatic fashion to say, well, the relationship with the United States is over. Or am I misreading his comments?
No, first of all, I would love to see this Trump business in Canada played out not in the middle of a federal election. Because let's face it, what these people are saying is purely trying to gain votes. And they've seen that thumping their chest and we're going to stand up against the bully is getting them votes. And that's unfortunate, because that's kind of a dumb response, frankly. But right now, because of that election, this is happening totally differently than it would at any other time. When I saw that on the news, because I very well remember seeing him say that, and my first thought was how incredibly irresponsible. We've had dust-ups with the U.S. before. This isn't the first time we've had a president that wanted to nail Canada and that kind of thing. Trump's around for a few years. Maybe he'd like to think he's going to get a third term, but not very likely. But he's a short-term thing. We are joined at the hip with the U.S. Our economies are incredibly integrated. That will continue to be the case. That doesn't mean we shouldn't seek other opportunities. Of course we should. And a lot of that is energy-based, such as Asia, Europe, with our liquid natural gas, for example, which we don't have the ability to do anywhere near to the extent we should be doing because of policies that have discouraged pipelines. So, but to think that the U.S. is over is ludicrous. It just won't happen. And there's so many advantages that Canada has gained to be a next door neighbor to the U.S. Our economy is much better off because of it. We've got a time limited irritant right now in Trump, who we don't know what he's going to do from one week to the next. And yeah, that's a problem, no question. It creates all kinds of uncertainty, which is the real challenge, is how to deal with that uncertainty, because a lot of businesses, you're just saying, wow, I'm not open that new plant I was thinking about right now. I'm not going to have that second shift that I might have been thinking about because I don't know what's happening. And that's probably the most damaging impact, is that uncertainty factor. But I thought that was very melodramatic and irresponsible of Carney to say that.
Yeah. Any comment, Bill, and then Marco?
Yeah, I wrote a whole column about it, and I thought it was a strange statement, and not the kind of thing that somebody who was a deft diplomatic manager of situations and crises would say, right? We had the high moral ground. The U.S. imposes these tariffs. What did we do to deserve it? We want to stay close to you. We don't think this is a good idea. Let's keep talking. No, what he says is the relationship is over, as if he's dealing from a position of strength. Now, Canada has obvious strengths, but in the economic relationship with the United States, we are very much the junior partner. That's kind of so obvious that it doesn't need to be said, I hope. And this idea that we're no longer going to do deepening integration with the United States, we're going to go and seek out other partners, many of whom have no interest at all in deepening integration with us. And we shouldn't have interest in deepening integration with China. We should be very leery of that. We have tried deepening integration with the European Union, and our Canada-European Union Free Trade Agreement, as far as I know, is still not officially ratified, because there are small areas of Europe, not even country size, but region size, that are concerned about competition from Canada. So I thought it was a beginner's mistake. I don't know who wrote it for him, and it was delivered in such funereal tones, such Undertaker-like tones. I just thought it was a complete error, unforced error. And when you look at I can't quite see the United States from Montreal, but it's almost like I can see the United States. And certainly from Toronto, if you go up the CN Tower, I think you can, on a clear day, see the United States. And they're 10 times our size no, they're not 10 times. They're about 8.5 in population, but 12 or 13 in terms of economy. So I think it's nutty. And I thought it was I've made that clear, I guess. I thought it was a big mistake.
Marco?
I think it's pretty generous to say that it is a mistake, and I'll tell you why in a second. But the first thing that it conjured up in my mind is delusion. If Canada tomorrow declared that its relationship with Lesotho was over, you'd say, okay, well, most Canadians couldn't find Lesotho on a map. But the fact that you declare that the principal and most important relationship, economic, militarily, you name it, of this country is over like that, and with a big sort of pause for effect, it's melodramatic, as Catherine pointed out. It is delusional, and there is no other word for it, because the United States isn't going to disappear from a border tomorrow, and therefore it is more than wishful thinking. But the part that it is not a mistake is that kind of rhetoric continued, and I heard it last night during the French debate. He said that he was going to deal with the United States, and I'm going to say it in French so that there is no mistakes. He said, avec une force écrasante.
Yeah, that was
a crushing force. Yeah. So the last time I heard somebody speak like that, was General Schwarzkopf when he was about to invade Iraq, and he was about to carpet bomb him into the Middle Ages, he said, or something to that effect. Now,
And he said it in English.
And he said it in English. Consider the words, right? A crushing force. First of all, force. Where from? What kind of force? Were we going to send CF-18s? They probably wouldn't be able to cross into American space before dropping out of the sky on their own. And crushing. I mean, that is also delusional. But what it underlies is the fact that he's trying to make up for, essentially, he's drawing attention to the deep weakness of this country by sort of trying to make it up with words. Canada does not have the ability to unleash crushing force on Lesotho, let alone on the United States. And so it isn't just a mistake. I think, Bill, I tend to disagree with you on that. It's a kind of desire to overcome the deep weakness that may be personal. I don't want to psychologize, but certainly we are in no position to deal in the way that we are trying to deal with the strongest and most dynamic economy on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a function of us being in the middle of an election right now, Marco. That's
Absolutely.
what that's all about, right? He wants his dramatic statement to look like a tough guy.
Yeah, well said. But I think in this context,
I don't want to be defeatist. I don't mean to say that we can't, get through this and maybe even do reasonably well. And I also think peak Trump occurred about a month ago, and people in the U.S. Who will be our friends in the political system there are beginning to percolate a bit. But to declare essentially we're not going to talk anymore and we're going to force our will on you with such a guy like Trump is just not a very good tactic. And I'm distressed that would appeal to people in Canada who can't see that that's just kind of inept and juvenile to do it that way.
It's weak.
Well, it frankly is counterproductive. It kind of jeopardizes the Canadian interest in ensuring we play the long game. It's very much looking to a multi-year relationship that's been around for generations that have served us well on the whole, while keeping in mind our own Canadian interests. So if we had clarity of mind when it comes to our Canadian interests, we wouldn't be, as this comment says, yep, it was a little insulting to the U.S. Well said, McDoom. This is the point, is that we need to be very smart about how we communicate, because we know these things are all being monitored well by the administration. And one of the things that occurs to me here is it seems like our Canadian political class don't get it on a number of fronts, if I can be so bold, including on the whole notion of the role of defense and security. And I think in the U.S. mind, if you want to be at the economic table, you also have to be at the security table. And so if you play the game that somehow we're going to be NATO laggards, you can't have it both ways. You can't be an economic partner. And I think like the last few weeks now, you've got the government now intentionally feeding out all kinds of contradictory signals on defense, including putting aside the F-35 contract, which has been finalized I don't know how many times over the last few decades. And meanwhile, you think you want to go into negotiations. And meanwhile, we know that I believe at last count, there are 92 countries that have beat a path to the Trump administration to talk about their trade deals. And I want to bring up a little graph here. It's very interesting if we look at the state of nations and what they're negotiating. We've got negotiating to trade, and that's just a few of them there on the left side of the page there. There's some 92 of them the last time I counted. There's ones that have already proactively offered concessions. There's others that have said no retaliation. And I'm trying to think, Israel is almost in its own category where Netanyahu, the president there, Netanyahu, has said, we're going to offer reciprocal trade at 0-0. And then there's two countries there on that graph, if you notice, that have retaliated, namely China, which is almost in its own category, and a country named Canada. So my question to you as a panel is Canada ham-fistedly and incompetently isolating ourselves with the Chinese of all things. And we end up potentially, and I bet you a loony, that in the next week there's going to be some major trade agreements announced. I suspect it's going to be Japan first, who knows? And we're going to be left kind of behind the 8 ball. Am I being too cynical about this, Marco? Any thoughts?
One of the things that I also noted last night is that the question of national security did not figure at all. None. It was not discussed. The border issues, the foreign interference, all the things that essentially are crucial, and in some ways, I mean, more existential than many of the issues that are being discussed. So it's not very serious, right? We're not being very serious on this front at all, and to think that Canada, in its own sort of modest way, has made tremendous contributions to international security, to the security of Europe, participated in lots of foreign peace initiatives and so forth. That isn't just about security, as you point out. It's also about gaining a place at the table in trade negotiations, in business, and in all kinds of different things. So we need, this is also one of those issues that Canadians need to wake up about and figure out that Canada needs to beef up its abilities here and find its way back to the table in the international arena.
Bill, and then Catherine.
Yeah, I suspect politically, especially during an election, it would have been difficult not to retaliate in some way. People did want elbows up, but the retaliation, it's basically a deal. I'm so angry at you, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot. And aren't you hurt by how much I've shot myself in the foot? And it doesn't,
Yes.
the Trump tariffs are mainly hurting the United States. And then we go on and say, well, we can hurt ourselves too. So there. But I think people wanted some sort of reaction. Jean Chrétien, suggested that we had to retaliate. He's always been a pretty good judge of public opinion. But I think you want to be strategic about it. Maybe you don't want to boast so much that you're going after Republicans, because that's not going to really help with Trump very much. He's going to be annoyed by that rather than impressed by it. And right now, the Republicans are not lining up to say, please, Mr. President, you got to do something about these Canadian tariffs that are being imposed on us. But I think you got to recognize that you're not going to live with these tariffs, your own tariffs, forever. You're going to try them. If they work, if they create influence in the United States, leverage in support of your case, that's great. If they don't, let's sort of quietly, I would have said, put them on for 6 months, or make them explicitly temporary, and then you start the negotiation. Trump does seem to be a person still in charge who doesn't like it when people stand up to him, and so then you have to make a decision. How much do you want to insist on standing up for your own self-respect, and how much are you willing to play along with them? But I think strategically you got to say, we're going to get a deal. You're going to have to do some things, and preferably you want to do the things that aren't going to hurt you and may even be good for you. And standing up to our NATO commitment and being a good NATO partner, which we always think we are, I think that's good for us. Now, it's tough to have to say, well, Trump is forcing us to do this thing, which is good for ourselves, but let's just not emphasize that part of it. Let's just go ahead and do it.
Exactly.
And then we can go and boast to him about it. Doing stuff at the border, they seem to be fixated about the border, renting 2 helicopters for 3 months, each of which would have to be refueled 8 times to make it across our border, make it along our Canada-U.S. border. I don't think they were very impressed by that, even though we apparently took videos of them to different meetings to show them these are helicopters. We acquired 2 Black Hawk helicopters. The U.S. Army has 2,000 Black Hawk helicopters. So I don't think that didn't work. We may have to run that one by them again. And I continue to think we're going to have to do something about dairy. And the smart thing to do, as the number of dairy farmers continues to decline, is you buy them out and shut them down.
Interesting.
Not in the sense that you must get out of dairy, but in the sense that we're going to have a free dairy industry, and you're not going to need quota to buy a cow and sell milk. It's going to be an open market, and Americans are going to be allowed in if Americans want to sell here. So I think that would also be good for us. We don't want to get in our own way. We got to figure out some way that we can do that and show Trump we're doing it, and also maintain self-respect and free up that market.
Okay,
I look forward
thank you.
to the day that we have reasonably cheap and good cheese.
Okay, there you have it from Bill Watson.
Me too.
Catherine, any comments on this one?
Well, yeah, I get back to, I've been calling this the cutting off our nose to spite our face strategy, which is what it is, because we're hurting ourselves, and again, I'll bring up the fact, if it wasn't happening in the middle of an election where politics is ruling over common sense, and the fact that some Canadians are responding positively, because let's face it, Trump is a character that people want to punch in the face. Unfortunately, we're punching ourselves in the face with the other hand. And as far as the defense stuff goes, with Russia and China, as aggressive as they are these days, we've always been lazy in Canada because we knew we could depend on the U.S. and we've been lucky, very lucky, to be able to do that. But boy, and it's not just one government's fault either. There's a lot of governments of different political stripes that have permitted the decline in our investment in our military, our protection of the North, and all that good stuff. And it's very much in our self-interest to smarten up and reverse that today, because the threats are greater than ever. When I was recently looking up some history of Alaska, it used to be a Russian property, Alaska. And there's a lot of aggression coming from some of these countries right now about the Canadian North. And boy, we're going to really regret it if we can't protect ourselves against that. And meeting NATO obligations, of course, we should do that. People are saying this is the end of NATO with Trump. I hope that's not true, because I think NATO has been a useful body over the years. It has more or less kept peace. And people are saying it's the end of NATO because of what Trump's doing. And I truly hope that they're wrong.
Yeah, well, let's hope it's actually the renewal of NATO as everybody carries their weight. And if Canada did it and everybody else did, then we'd have NATO as its vision and its founding. So I want to turn to the end of our conversation. We've had a far-reaching conversation when it comes to policy. It sounds like we all agree, and so does the audience in many ways. As the comment here says, the PCs and Liberals have gutted our military. We've got a lot of great comments from the audience here over our conversation. But it sounds like we need to get our act together in Canada. Our policy, we need to strengthen our country, whether it's tax relief, the theme of deregulation, getting our government under control. We've got energy, self-sufficiency and development, unleashing oil and gas, and of course, trade, including beginning with trade in our own country. So we've got lots to do. Is there any final words of wisdom as we look to the home stretch? Is there any particular issue that you think that Canadians need to think about as they make their choice for Election Day? Who wants to start with that? Marco?
I think one of the things that I see that are kind of similar to the last sort of election in terms of the framework is that voters were stampeded into fear. In the last election, it was the big COVID bug that was going to kill us all. And today, the equivalent has been the orange guy. And we need to fear him. And no one makes good decisions when they make decisions in fear or in panic. So I guess my advice to my countrymen in Canada would be step back, look at the issues, look at the ideas before you make a choice. But no one should be making conscious decisions in the middle of some kind of panic or fear that the country is going to disappear, that the Americans are going to invade us, that we're 51st state, and all this nonsense, which really is in the end nonsense.
Thank you, Marco. Catherine?
Well, just following on a little bit about what Marco said, if we had not had 10 years of very bad policy, we wouldn't be in the weakened economic state that we're in right now. We wouldn't be as divided as a country. There's terrible national unity problems in Canada, as well as serious economic and social problems. We would have been much better situated to stand up to Trump or anybody else for that matter, if we had a stronger economy and a more cohesive society. And that was caused by Liberals. I don't see going forward any significant change in that if we re-elect Liberals. So I think, once again, we should focus on what we have control over, our economic environment, our competitiveness, get a grip on immigration again so that we can get housing under control, all of those issues that were self-inflicted because we didn't have to go there, but a government chose to do that.
Thank you, Catherine. Bill?
I guess to a certain extent, I'm echoing that. As an economist, we tend to think that incentives are important. I talked earlier about the disincentive from high taxes, the disincentive from excessive regulation. The way I look at this election, you've got one group that's been in power for 10 years. Many Canadians will disagree. Like Catherine, I think they've done a generally poor job. And partly because they've been marching in the wrong direction. What is the incentive in democratic politics? What's the incentive effect if you re-elect people who've done a lousy job for 10 years? I don't think that's a great idea. I betray my political preference, at least in this election. There's a lot of things I don't like about the Conservatives. They pander in their own way. And nobody's the ideal sort of economist party candidate who would lower all taxes, apply them to all bases so that you could have low taxes applied on a wide base and restrain yourself when you go ahead and regulate. But in the absence of the ideal party, it seems to me re-electing the party that screwed up for 10 years, even with a new leader who may or may not be more likely to screw up, is we would say in the ugly term of economics, incentive incompatible.
Okay.
Not a good incentive you're creating. So.
All right. Spoken like an economist, Bill. Thank you very much. And I want to thank our panel, Catherine Swift from the president of the Coalition of Concerned Businesses and Manufacturers, as well as Dr. Marco Navarro-Gini, Vice President of Research and Policy at Frontier, and of course, William Watson, the editor of the Financial Post opinion page. It's been a delightful conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today for this important discussion, as well as our audience. We've had tremendous comments and questions. I apologize that we could not get to all of them. There's been a lot of comments I noticed about affordability and housing. I noticed Cheryl brought that up, to all kinds of comments related to foreign interference and many others. So I want to thank all of you for participating in this, and encourage you to all make sure that you're registered to vote. Advance polls open this weekend, so be sure to participate. Elections are important because policy choices do matter and impact not only our generation, but the next generation. So on that note, I want to wish you, everyone, a great week, and be sure to join us for the next Thursday live discussion. And on behalf of us and the producer, Lorraine, and I, thank you for joining us this week.
Happy Easter.
Yes,
Happy Easter.
All the best.
Yes, and blessed Easter to everyone. And thank you very much.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.